Let's begin. Number 1. Germany's favourite child. Imagine you're Germany. You're really, really good at making cars. You build engines so precise they could perform surgery in luxury sedans that weigh more than a small whale. But let's be honest, in the 2010s, all the cool kids are in tech. The US has Apple, Google, and Amazon. China has Alibaba and Tencent. You have SAP? It's just not sexy. Then along comes Wirecard. Oh, Wirecard. It wasn't just a company, it was a national ego boost. This was your golden child, your high-tech saviour, the company that proved Germany could do more than just really good washing machines. By 2018, Wirecard was so beloved, it kicked Commerzbank, a 150-year-old banking institution, right out of the prestigious DAX 30 stock index. Its market cap ballooned to over $28 billion. This wasn't just some scrappy startup. This was a fintech giant, a payment processor that was supposedly handling transactions for thousands of businesses worldwide. It was complex, digital, and growing at a speed that made old-school German bankers sweat. Analysts fell over themselves to praise CEO Markus Braun, a turtleneck-wearing visionary who promised to revolutionize, well, everything. Investors, blinded by patriotism and the fear of missing out, shoveled their money into the furnace. The lesson here: never, ever invest based on national pride. Your money doesn't care about your flag. When a company becomes a symbol of national hope, it stops being a business and becomes a religion. And religions are fantastic at collecting money, but they are notoriously bad at producing audited financial statements. Number 2, the $2.1 billion bank account that wasn't. Every great magic trick has a prestige, the final reveal. But before that, it has the turn, where the magician takes something ordinary and makes it do something extraordinary. For Wirecard, the ordinary thing was its revenue. The extraordinary part was that most of it didn't exist. For years, the core of Wirecard's miracle growth supposedly came from its third-party acquirers, TPAs, in Asia. These were mysterious partners in places like the Philippines and Singapore who processed payments for Wirecard in markets it couldn't operate in directly. This TPA business was allegedly responsible for all of the company's profits. That's right. The main, boring German business apparently made no money. All the magic beans were overseas. When auditors at KPMG finally got permission to investigate in late 2019, they asked one simple, devastating question. Can we see the money? Specifically, they wanted to see the $2.1 billion, $1.9 billion, that Wirecard claimed was sitting in cash, mostly in 2 banks in the Philippines. This was the trust part of the balance sheet. Wirecard stalled. They blamed local laws. They blamed humidity. They probably blamed Mercury being in retrograde. Finally, in June 2020, the truth came out. The banks in the Philippines issued statements saying, essentially, we have no idea who these people are. These documents are fake, and that money has never, ever been here. The $2.1 billion, the entire foundation of the company's profit, evaporated. It wasn't just lost, it was never there. It was a typo in the world's most expensive spreadsheet. Number 3. How to attack a journalist. What do you do when someone accuses you of being a massive fraud? If you're innocent, you open your books, show them the bank statements, and politely invite them to shut up. If you're guilty, you call the cops on the journalist. For years, starting around 2015, a small group of journalists at the Financial Times, led by Dan McCroom, kept pointing out that Wirecard's numbers looked weird. Like, we found a unicorn in the petty cash. Weird. The TPA business in Asia seemed fake, the partners were ghosts, and the growth was mathematically impossible. Every time McCrum published a story, Wirecard didn't just issue a press release, it went nuclear. The company, its executives, and its army of rabid investors accused the FT of market manipulation. They claimed it was a conspiracy with evil short sellers to destroy Germany's tech champion. But they didn't stop at name-calling. In 2019, Wirecard actually got BaFin, Germany's own financial regulator, to launch a criminal investigation against the Financial Times reporters. BaFin even banned short selling of Wirecard stock, basically protecting the fraud and muzzling the truth-tellers. This is the financial equivalent of calling 911 because a detective found a body in your basement, and then the cops arrest the detective for trespassing. It was a terrifying state-sponsored campaign to silence the press. When a company's only defense is to sue the people asking questions, your money is already gone. It just doesn't know it yet. Number 4, the man in the black turtleneck. If you're going to run a multi-billion-dollar fraud, you need a front man, and not just any front man. You need a cult leader. For Wirecard, that was Markus Braun, the Austrian CEO. Braun was a tech bro caricature, a computer science PhD, a permanent uniform of black turtlenecks, a budget Steve Jobs, and a speaking style that sounded like a self-help audiobook being translated from Klingon. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a visionary. He spoke in baffling jargon about synergies, platforms, and value-added ecosystems. He didn't just run a payments company. He was conducting the fintech symphony. Investors didn't just buy his stock, they bought his aura. He convinced the entire German establishment that he was a genius, and they were too polite or too greedy to ask what any of his buzzwords actually meant, even as the Financial Times was publishing smoking gun evidence. Braun would go on TV, look the camera dead in the eye, and dismiss it all as noise from speculators. He had a stare that could freeze lava, and a level of self-assurance that bordered on the sociopathic. When the $2.1 billion hole was finally revealed in June 2020, his response was pure, uncut delusion. He released a video message claiming Wirecard was the victim of a fraud of considerable proportions. He was technically right, just not in the way he meant. He was acting like his car had been stolen, when in fact he was the one who'd been driving it into a lake for 10 years. Markus Braun's greatest achievement wasn't building a tech company. It was building a reality distortion field that convinced an entire nation that his nonsensical PowerPoint slides were a license to print money. 5. The spymaster who wasn't there. If Markus Braun was the public-facing visionary, the real dark magic was happening in the basement, and the head wizard was Jan Marsalek, the chief operating officer. This guy wasn't your average COO. He wasn't optimizing supply chains. He was living a James Bond villain's origin story. Marsalek, also Austrian, was the company's man of action. While Braun was hypnotizing investors, Marsalek was supposedly running those lucrative Asian operations. But his real hobby was intelligence. Reports that surfaced after the collapse paint a picture of a guy who bragged about his connections to Russian and Austrian intelligence agencies, allegedly partied with Libyan warlords, and even claimed to have the formula for the nerve agent Novichok. You know, normal COO stuff. This is where the fraud stops being funny business and starts getting state security incident dark. Marsalek was the one managing the network of fake partners and shell companies. When the House of Cards finally collapsed in June 2020, Braun turned himself in. Marsalek, on the other hand, checked his emails, told colleagues he was flying to the Philippines to find the missing money, and then vanished. He was last tracked to Belarus, and from there, he evaporated. This wasn't a white-collar criminal fleeing to a non-extradition country. This was a high-level spook disappearing behind the Iron Curtain, allegedly with the help of the Russian GRU. The lesson? If your company's COO has a go bag and a passport collection that would make Jason Bourne blush, your investment portfolio is about to become a classified document. 6. The world's most expensive typo. You have one job, just one. You're Ernst & Young, EY, one of the big 4 accounting firms on planet Earth. Companies pay you millions of dollars a year for one thing, to look at their books and verify that the numbers are real. You're the financial watchdog, the adult in the room, the sober referee. For 10 years, EY audited Wirecard. Every year they gave the company a clean bill of health. They signed off on the balance sheets, they looked at the astronomical profits coming from those shady TPA partners in Asia, and said, "Yep, looks good to us." But here's the kicker. They apparently never bothered to actually check the bank accounts. They didn't call the banks. For years, it seems they accepted screenshots and forged documents as proof of the $2.1 billion. Imagine hiring a home inspector, and they inspect your foundation by looking at a crayon drawing your kid made of the house. That's what EY did. They trusted the very people they were supposed to be auditing. When the fraud finally blew up in 2020, EY's defense was basically a corporate shrug. They claimed it was a very sophisticated and elaborate fraud, and that, even with more robust checks, the fraud may not have been detected. This is like a security guard at a bank saying, "Look, the robbers had really good masks. What did you expect me to do?" They failed at their one singular function for a solid decade. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a professional catastrophe that vaporized $28 billion and proved that audited doesn't always mean real. 7. The watchdog that barked at the mailman. Imagine you have a guard dog, a very expensive, very serious-looking German Shepherd. One night, a burglar breaks into your house and starts stealing your TV. The burglar is very loud. He's telling you he's stealing your TV. A neighbour calls 911. What does your expensive guard dog do? It bites the neighbour. That dog is BaFin, Germany's financial regulator. Their entire job is to smell fraud and protect investors. And when the Financial Times spent years yelling, "There is a burglar in the house," BaFin didn't just ignore them, it attacked them. In 2019, in a move that will live in financial infamy, BaFin banned investors from short-selling Wirecard stock for 2 months. Short-selling is betting that a stock will go down, is what you do when you think a company is, say, a giant hollow fraud. BaFin's justification was that the FT's accurate reporting was a threat to market stability. They weren't just asleep at the wheel, they were actively helping the carjackers. They launched a criminal investigation into the journalists for market manipulation, basically accusing them of making up the fraud to profit from the short sellers they were supposedly colluding with. The regulator, the single entity meant to stop this, became the fraud's most powerful enabler. It was a spectacular nation-level failure of common sense. The lesson here is that regulators are run by humans, and humans are susceptible to patriotism, political pressure, and looking really, really stupid if their national tech champion turns out to be a lie. Sometimes, the watchdog isn't just protecting the wrong house, it's helping the thieves load the furniture into the van. 8. The $1 billion dose of hopium. By early 2019, the smell around Wirecard was getting pretty bad. The FT was dropping bombshells every other month. Whistleblowers were leaking internal documents. The math just didn't add up. So, what do you do when the world thinks you're a fraud? You find the biggest, most excitable investor on the planet and get them to give you their money. Enter SoftBank. Yes, that's SoftBank, the Japanese investing giant famous for lighting biblical-scale bonfires of cash on companies like WeWork. In April 2019, SoftBank announced it was investing $1 billion as $900 million into Wirecard. For the market, this was the ultimate stamp of approval. It was a strategic partnership. All the doubts, all the FT articles, all the missing money, it all vanished. Because surely, you thought, surely SoftBank and its legendary Vision Fund did their homework right. They must have sent in an army of forensic accountants. They must have seen the bank accounts. Right? Wrong. The investment gave Wirecard the one thing it desperately needed: credibility. The stock soared. All the analysts who were on the fence could now breathe easy. See? SoftBank's in. It must be real. This is the most dangerous lesson in investing: social proof. It's the idea that if a smart or big investor likes something, it must be a good investment. It's an intellectual shortcut that lets you skip your own homework. But here's the secret. Smart money is often just as dumb and just as desperate for a quick win as you are. SoftBank didn't validate Wirecard. It just bought the most expensive front row ticket to the explosion. 9. The Great Evaporation. For a decade, Wirecard was a master of the stall. The audit is coming. The documents are in transit. The partner in Manila is on vacation. But in June 2020, the road ran out. The company was legally required to release its audited 2019 annual report. They had already delayed it 3 times. The new final drop-dead date was June 18th, 2020. Investors were nervous, but still clinging to hope. Then, the announcement dropped. EY, the auditors, refused to sign. Why? Because they could not locate, verify, or even find a single trace of $1.9 billion dust and $2.1 billion in cash. This was the money supposedly held in trust in the Philippines. It wasn't just delayed, it was missing. Markus Braun, in a masterwork of understatement, claimed the company was the aggrieved party of a massive fraud. But the market finally understood. This wasn't a clerical error, it was the entire company. The stock, which had traded at over $100 just days before, collapsed by 99%. It fell from a $28 billion valuation to basically zero. It was a high-speed car crash, but when the smoke cleared, there was no engine, there was no car, there was just a chalk outline. On June 22nd, the company admitted the money likely does not exist. On June 25th, Wirecard filed for insolvency. It took 1 week for Germany's greatest tech champion to reveal itself as Germany's biggest financial crime. It turns out vision is just a fancy word for not looking at your bank statements. 10. The $3.6 billion IOU. So the $2.1 billion in cash was fake. That's bad. You know what's worse? When the $3.6 billion you owe to other people is very, very real. As soon as Wirecard filed for insolvency on June 25th, 2020, the real victims started lining up, and at the front of the line were the banks. A consortium of 15 major banks, including Germany's own Commerzbank and Dutch giant ABN AMRO, had loaned Wirecard a total of $3.2 billion, about $3.6 billion. Why did they lend so much money to a company that, in retrospect, looked like a child's drawing of a business? Because they trusted the audits. They trusted EY. They trusted the German regulator, BaFin. And most of all, they trusted the DAX 30 brand. When the company went belly up, all that revolving credit seized up. The banks went into a full-blown panic, realizing their loans were backed by what exactly? Markus Braun's turtleneck collection? The debt was unsecured, meaning there was no hard asset, no factory, no building to seize and sell. The money was just gone. This is the horrifying ripple effect of corporate fraud. It's not just shareholders who get vaporized, it's the entire financial system that gets a black eye. Banks, pension funds, and other institutions that you think are stable suddenly find a $3.6 billion hole in their balance sheets because they believed a PowerPoint presentation. The lesson is brutally simple. When you lend money, trust is not a valid form of collateral. Audited by EY was, in this case, worth less than the paper it was printed on. 11. The politicians who looked the other way. This wasn't just a corporate failure, it was a national failure, and it went all the way to the top. As the FT was publishing its investigations in 2019, who was defending Wirecard? Not just its PR team, the German government. In September 2019, while on a trip to China, German Chancellor Angela Merkel herself lobbied on Wirecard's behalf, trying to help the company gain entry into the Chinese market. She was personally shilling for a hollowed-out fraud, using the power of the German Chancellery as its sales team. Her finance minister at the time, Olaf Scholz, who would later become Chancellor, ran the ministry that oversaw BaFin. You know, the regulator that was busy prosecuting the journalists instead of the criminals. When the whole thing imploded in 2020, the political fallout was nuclear. A full parliamentary inquiry was launched. Politicians were dragged in front of committees to explain how they could be so blind, so incompetent, or so compromised. It turned out that high-ranking officials at BaFin were actively trading Wirecard shares while the investigations were ongoing. The head of Germany's other accounting watchdog, FREP, was also a vocal Wirecard supporter. The entire German establishment, from its top politicians to its financial regulators, was either asleep, stupid, or actively complicit. They were so desperate for a tech champion, so blinded by national pride, that they willingly ignored a fraud happening in broad daylight. It's the single best argument for why your money should always be deeply, deeply skeptical of any company that politicians start to love. 12. The world's saddest mugshot. What happens to a visionary CEO when the vision turns out to be a crime scene? On June 22, 2020, after admitting the 2.1 billion was imaginary, Markus Braun resigned. The next day, he walked into a Munich police station and turned himself in. He was arrested on suspicion of market manipulation and false accounting. This was the man who, just a year earlier, was a $15 billion man, the turtleneck-clad genius of German tech. Now, he was just another guy in a cheap suit getting his mugshot taken. He was briefly released on $5 million bail, but as the scale of the fraud became clearer, that this wasn't an oopsie but a decade-long criminal conspiracy, he was rearrested in July 2020. As of late 2025, Braun is still in custody, facing a massive trial in Germany. His defense? He claims he knew nothing. He paints himself as the ultimate victim, a trusting, hands-off visionary who was betrayed by his shadowy COO Jan Marsalek. He claims he's the biggest sucker of them all. It's a bold strategy. It's the "I was just too smart to notice the biggest fraud in German history happening in my own office" defense. While Marsalek is sipping cocktails in Moscow or Minsk, Braun is stuck in a German courtroom, the last man holding the bag. It's a pathetic end for a tech messiah, but it's a fitting one. When you build your entire identity on being the smartest guy in the room, you don't get to play dumb when the bill finally comes due. Final line. Sign off. Anyway, that's how you convince an entire country to invest in a JPEG of a bank account. Subscribe before your government tries the same thing.